On August 21, 2026, a kitchen door opens on a young man who has not yet become a brand. A24 released Tony that Friday, with Dominic Sessa playing Anthony Bourdain at 19, before Kitchen Confidential, before the travel shows, before the world decided it knew him. The film arrives already surrounded by argument, not about ticket prices, about whether a life that ended in 2018 still belongs to anyone living enough to sell it. Sessa has been explaining the work in interviews, how he approached a man audiences still quote at dinner tables. A Rotten Tomatoes clip circulating with the film carries a 94% score beside his face, as if a number could settle the ethics. It cannot. Bourdain was a chef, a writer, a television presence who made other people's cities feel like invitations. He was also a person whose death turned every subsequent project into a referendum. Fans arrive protective, detractors arrive early, the studio arrives prepared. Because this is not only a biopic, it is a test of a method. Tony is the kind of movie traditional Hollywood once treated as specialty product, mid-budget, culturally specific, dependent on people who already care.
And yet the release is being received as weather. Trailers travel like private messages. Stills look like relics. People who never worked a line cook's shift argue about whether dramatizing a tragic icon is tribute or extraction. Here is the contradiction the film makes visible. An independent distributor, operating far from the old studio lot logic, can take a niche origin story about a flawed, dead genius and make it feel mandatory. Not by buying every billboard on Sunset Boulevard, by treating attention as something you seduce, not something you purchase in bulk. The country is watching a 19-year-old Bourdain that never existed on camera. The real mystery sits behind the logo. How does a company turn taste into an event? How does it convert grief, nostalgia, and internet culture into opening weekend gravity? And why does that conversion keep working on subjects who cannot sign the poster? The lights go down on a life already finished. The business of unfinished feeling begins.
For a generation, a movie did not open. It was forced into the sky. A major studio finished the cut, then spent as if the cut were incomplete without a second film made of commercials. 30-second spots landed inside football games. Transit shelters wore the same face for 6 weeks. Billboards stacked along the 405 until the city itself looked like a trailer. The line item had a dull name, prints and advertising, and it could match the production budget, then outrun it. The doctrine was simple. Strangers would not come unless you paid to become unavoidable. That doctrine hid a failure. It taught companies to treat adult peculiarity as a defect. A mid-budget film with a specific accent, a specific subculture, a specific moral temperature became either a write-down or a problem to be solved with more noise. Specialty labels were launched with festival speeches and closed with quarterly hygiene. The audience for strange work was filed under small, older, and costly to reach. So the industry chased 4-quadrant insurance and left the rest to Sundance, weather, and luck. Luck is not a business model. In 2012, in New York, A24 was founded as a refusal of that sentence.
The name came from the Autostrada A24, an Italian highway, associated, in the founder's telling, with a drive and a feeling, rather than a soundstage. The choice announced a geography of mood. This would not look like a lot with gates and a water tower. It would look like a trip you wanted to take. The first strategic decision was an abandonment. Traditional Hollywood marketing assumed a cold public, a nation that had never heard your title and would not hear it unless a media buy punched through dinner. A24 bet on a hotter map. The internet had already sorted people into hungers: elevated horror, bruised coming of age, crime under jewelry store lights, movies that felt like a dare. You did not need to spray the continent. You needed to reach the cluster that would carry the film for you, then get out of the way while the cluster performed the advertising that used to require a conglomerate. That inversion is the part most casual viewers still miss when they talk about indie buzz, as if buzz were climate. Buzz was built. It was timed to festivals, to social platforms, to objects you could hold, to jokes that could travel without a media agency's permission.
The company learned to spend less on the blast and more on the point of contact. A campaign was not a wall of repetition. It was a series of private invitations that photographed well when they leaked. This is also why a Bourdain picture fits the catalog with an almost cruel precision. He had already assembled the crowd. He changed what culinary television could sound like, dragging travel journalism away from hotel polish and toward appetite, politics, and the unpretty rooms behind a service door. After he died, the market for his afterlife did not fade. It condensed. In 2021, the documentary Roadrunner turned that afterlife into a fight when filmmakers used artificial intelligence to recreate his voice. Admirers heard a ghost. Critics heard a theft. People who had loved him as a companion now had to decide whether a machine saying his sentences counted as him. The argument was ugly because the asset was intimate. A voice is not a poster. The episode was a preview of a larger industry reflex. Call it, without romance, the biopic assembly line. A completed life is easier to schedule than a living one. The dead do not storm out of hair and makeup.
They do not publish a disappointed essay. Their contradictions become structure. Their worst seasons become third acts. A culture trained by prestige television and the true crime buffet arrives already hungry for the origin of a wound. Youth is the most efficient wound. It lets the audience lean forward and whisper that they can see the ending coming. A24 did not invent that hunger. Larger studios have been mining famous corpses for decades. What the smaller company understood was plating. While conglomerates still confused ubiquity with importance, this distributor treated recognition and scarcity as the same spice. You were not meant to see their one sheet on every block. You were meant to feel late if your particular timeline was already speaking in the film's grammar. Hollywood kept buying the crowd as if people were inventory. A24 kept curating a room and discovered that a well-kept room can seat more people than a billboard. The present film is only the newest object set on that table. Specialty cinema was supposed to remain a side chapel. Instead, a New York company that declined the old spend taught the chapel to collect a congregation.
The historical mistake was believing that attention had to be purchased at national scale, or not at all. The correction is sitting in theaters now, wearing a dead man's youth, asking a living audience to pay for the feeling of having known him earlier. The company has a logo. Behind the logo are three men who wanted different kinds of control. Daniel Katz came out of film finance at Guggenheim Partners, a room where movies arrived as a risk, not as mood boards. He had watched capital move toward projects and away from them according to covenants, pre-sales, and the temperature of foreign buyers. That education leaves a mark. It makes a person allergic to the industry's favorite superstition, that a great film will automatically find a great audience if you simply believe harder. Katz's motive was not to become a celebrity mogul. It was to build a slate that could survive contact with arithmetic. David Finkel arrived from Oscilloscope Laboratories, where independent film was handled like a craft object that could be damaged by the wrong touch. His incentive was protection. A certain kind of movie dies in a meeting when someone asks who the audience is and will not accept people with taste as an answer. Finkel had already lived inside the smaller circulation of art house titles. He knew how a film could be loved in 2 cities and invisible in 20. The obsession was to make love travel without sanding the picture into a slogan.
John Hodges came from Big Beach, the production company that had shepherded Little Miss Sunshine, proof that an odd human comedy could move if someone refused to flatten it. His motive sat between the other two. He had seen what happens when a strange picture is sheltered long enough to become inevitable. Shelter is expensive in Hollywood because shelter looks like delay, and delay looks like fear. Hodges understood that the fear was usually about marketing, not about the cut. Their shared decision was almost unfashionable. Keep production budgets tight, often in a band that ran from about $5 million to about 15, sometimes even lower when the story allowed it. The point was not purity. The point was leverage. A film that does not require a fortune can tolerate a narrower opening. It can tolerate a director who will not test screen the soul out of a scene. It can tolerate a star who is not a global toy. Creative control is a luxury good in this business. They bought it by refusing the budget that would have forced them to surrender it. Then they made a second decision that looked, at first, like a side hustle. They treated the studio name as a lifestyle product.
Hoodies, books, objects that let a viewer wear membership. In an older studio system, merchandise followed a children's franchise, a superhero, a talking animal. A24 sold the feeling of having chosen correctly. The community was curated, the way a sharp record label once curated listeners. If you bought the shirt, you were not buying a character, you were buying a filter. That choice reveals the psychology. They did not want to win the weekend, so much as they wanted to own the aisle. A conglomerate chases the entire mall. These founders wanted the customers who would be embarrassed to be seen in the wrong theater. Embarrassment is a powerful market force. So is belonging. The hidden motive is not simple cynicism about art. It is a belief that art, once branded, can be reordered as identity, and identity repeats. There were life or death choices inside that belief. If you measure death the way independent companies measure it, one overspend, one arrogant slate, one attempt to imitate a major, and the room empties. They could have taken larger checks earlier and become a mini-major with the same panic as everyone else. They could have chased comic book gravity.
They stayed inside a narrower appetite and gambled that appetite was an asset, not a limitation. The gamble required a kind of coldness about their own myth. Anti-Hollywood is a brand position. It is also a constraint. The moment they needed the machinery of a large studio, they would have to admit they had been speaking a dialect of the same language. So they built merch tables and mailing lists and a tone of voice that made the constraint feel like taste. 3 men, 3 adjacent scars. 1 rule. Do not buy the crowd. Make the crowd want a membership.
The Playbook becomes visible in a bar in Austin. It is 2015, South by Southwest, and Ex Machina needs to feel like a secret that is already watching you. The film is a lean science fiction chamber piece about a man, a machine, a house that is also a test. Conventional marketing would have bought genre inventory and called it a day. Instead, someone builds a Tinder profile for Ava, the android, geofence to the festival city. Men swipe. She matches. The conversation is uncanny in the way the movie is uncanny. Then the account guides the match toward the picture, toward an Instagram presence, toward the joke that you have been flirting with a campaign. The stunt is small in dollars and large in grammar. It does not shout. It recruits. Every person who matches becomes a storyteller. Screenshots move faster than a media plan. The internet does not feel advertised to. It feels implicated. That is the socially native campaign. Slightly transgressive, cheap enough to survive if it fails, perfect if it is captured by the exact cohort that already enjoys feeling early. 4 years later, the grammar repeats in a different key.
Uncut Gems is a panic attack set in the Diamond District. Adam Sandler frayed into a jeweler who cannot stop betting. A24 does not lean only on reviews. It builds physical pop-ups that look like the movie's nervous system. Jewelry, fluorescent hunger, the sport of display. People do not just watch a character hustle. They walk into a temporary version of his world and photograph themselves inside the hustle. The film becomes a place. A place is easier to share than a plot synopsis. These are not isolated gimmicks. They are a replacement for the old wall of repetition. Word of mouth is treated as a designed object. Festival premieres are timed like detonators. Posters look like vinyl covers. Trailers withhold the wrong information and over-offer atmosphere. Horror titles arrive with church-like seriousness. Coming-of-age titles arrive as if they were found footage of your own worst year. The company learns the temperature of each cluster and refuses to speak to all clusters in the same voice. Proof arrives as trophies that look, from a distance, like accidents.
In 2017, Moonlight, made for roughly $1.5 million, wins Best Picture after a chaotic envelope at the Academy Awards, and a tiny, specific Miami story becomes a permanent exhibit in American film history. In 2023, Everything Everywhere All at Once converts a wild family multiverse into a hall of Oscars, including Best Picture. And suddenly, the house style is no longer a niche handshake.
It is a path to the center of the industry without surrendering the pose of the edge. Each win teaches investors the same lesson that Tinderbot taught teenagers in Austin. Intimacy scales if you never let it look like a blast. The financial mechanism underneath is almost boring, which is why it works. Because the production outlay stays contained, a campaign does not have to conquer the Super Bowl. A film can profit inside a devoted circuit, then expand if the circuit catches fire. Upside is allowed, downside is fenced. That fence is the real creative manifesto. Directors get final moods because the spreadsheet can survive a mood. When a title overperforms, the overperformance looks like magic. It is not magic. It is optionality purchased with restraint.
Restraint, however, creates its own conflict. Taste, once it becomes reliable, attracts the thing taste pretends to flee: scale. Streamers want the logo. Fashion wants the collaboration. Actors want the halo. Money wants a multiple. The anti-Hollywood company begins to carry Hollywood gravity without Hollywood's old waste. Employees can still talk like a boutique. The market starts talking like a late-stage brand. Idealism said protect strange films. Reality said strange films, once protected, become a luxury category, and luxury categories get appraised. Ambition said never become them. Constraint said you will need their kind of capital if you want to keep directors in the room and still own the upside. The barrier that breaks is the old assumption that independent film is structurally small. The domino that falls is innocence. In June 2024, the talking becomes a price. Thrive Capital, the New York firm associated with Josh Kushner, leads a funding round that values A24 at $3.5 billion. Forbes reports the figure. The Los Angeles Times reports the figure. Sit with the qualifier, because the internet will not.
The studio did not generate $3.5 billion in profit from a single film. The number is enterprise value, what investors will pay to own a piece of a company whose real inventory is a feeling of correctness, repeated across titles, objects, and a public that treats the logo as a guarantee. A dedicated niche multiplied across enough well-chosen bets can be marked like a consumer company. Legacy studios still own libraries, lots, and theme park logic. This round claims that a community can rival some of that enterprise weight without owning a castle in Orlando. The climax is therefore not a premiere, it is a term sheet. Once a taste machine is priced like a platform, every subsequent film is also a brand deposit, including a biopic about a chef who despised fake rooms. The same techniques that made a Tinder android feel alive can make a dead man feel available. Targeted intimacy does not come with a moral governor. It comes with a return profile. Investors who validated the model that June did not purchase a philosophy seminar. They purchased the right to more events, more merch, more lives, rendered as seasons of a house style. The company can still choose well.
Choice is not the same as purity. And then the logo looks less like a highway and more like a storefront.
A young cook is on screen this week, and the audience already knows the airports, the books, the last hotel in France. That is the peculiar cruelty of the origin story. It pretends to be a beginning while selling a known ending. A24 did not need to invent the hunger for flawed genius. It only had to become the most fluent restaurant for it. Low waste in the kitchen, high ceremony at the table, a house style that makes dissection feel like devotion. This is the principle the case study earns, and it is not a sermon about capitalism in the abstract. It is a narrower fact about culture as inventory. When a distributor learns to turn mid-budget specificity into a membership, the membership will eventually demand lives as well as plots. A fictional android on a dating app and a real chef's unfinished youth are not the same object. They use the same door. Both ask a stranger to feel personally addressed. Both convert that address into a ticket, a shirt, a quote, a fight. The indie blockbuster is the name people reach for when a small film behaves like weather. The phrase hides the trade. Blockbuster used to mean a bet so large it could break the bettor.
Here, the bet is sized so it rarely breaks, while the emotion is sized as if it could. Grief becomes a reliable spice. Nostalgia becomes distribution.
Debate becomes free media. None of that requires a conspiracy. It requires a public that wants to handle famous pain with the seriousness of a sacrament and the speed of a feed. Bourdain told people to leave the hotel, to eat the unpretty thing, to distrust the polished room. The industry that now dramatizes his early years is a polished room that has studied how to look unpretty. That is not hypocrisy unique to one logo. It is the aftertaste of any method that works too well. A company that once refused the old spend now carries a valuation large enough to make refusal look like a phase. The films can remain sharp. The surrounding ritual gets smoother every year. Watch the credits with that in mind. Somewhere a line producer counted days. Somewhere a lawyer counted rights. Somewhere a merch designer asked what color reads as appetite. The dissection of genius is no longer a rare prestige accident. It is a repeatable skew in a catalog that taught the world to trust a feeling.
Critical acclaim and a multi-billion-dollar business can share a parking lot. They already do. Leave the theater and the city is still selling dinners he will never eat. The camera has done its job. The remaining work is ours, and it is less flattering. If a life can be plated this cleanly, what else are we prepared to order? And who do we think gets the tip?